Okay, now we're going into part two on this, where we're looking at the idea of perhaps the God of the Bible was maybe a dragon. And that sounds so foolish, just left wide open. That's the reason I pretty much had to have a 30-40 minute opening just to give a little bit of flavor. And now as we do it, we'll have other flavor. I've talked about other civilizations having it, the Sumerians and so on, that they were well aware of, but you wouldn't think that they had it inside themselves. But the ancient Canaanites definitely had dragons in their iconography too, and fiery serpents also. We'll talk about that in linguistics, and we'll also look at a few Bible phrases that you can look up yourself and see that it doesn't make connections like what we're saying here. And so different people had this going on through a long time, but there's way more connections than there were that I just showed you there in that little small list here. Here we're looking at something that looks like an Ouroboros, and that's a connection too. I've shown you where this is two snakes coming together, and an idea that got taken through the Conan the Barbarian idea movie somewhat, but also the idea of how a snake is reborn and its mythological birth cycle situation, but also that connects to a zodiac and the spinning around of a situation that gets reborn, because apparently these people at this time were still aware that there was this old tale, and then it got reborn into this other tale, and then got reborn into this other tale. How long is that? Well, it says it spins around, 3 times around that. 28,000 times 3 is wow. Are you trying to give an indication of age by doing that? Perhaps it happened a little bit not off of that perfect little scale to where they said, oh, well, once it came around finally to this point, then they did it, and they did it each one. But there's a connection to that 3 also that goes on to that, but that's not the scope of this video, really. We're really making connections here with the ancient beliefs of the Canaanites and how this dragon idea goes on here down this rabbit hole, aren't we? Well, in Alice in Wonderland, that's what we're talking about. Going through a looking glass, down a rabbit hole, follow the rabbit, grab your coffee. Ooh, I'm late. Was there one in that? Yeah, if you read the whole thing onto it, or if you've even seen the secondary movie with Johnny Depp and so on, there's a Jabberwocky. What's that? Let's continue. So you see connections, of nostrils, flame, and its physicality. We're going to show that here. Here's a depiction in India, and if you look at this, you'd be like, oh, that's an elephant. Can an elephant be a dragon? Well, he doesn't breathe fire, but he's got connections that you see drawn in depictions of dragons. Really? You're looking at one. But let's continue. That guy has feathers on him too, so an elephant-headed flavor. Oh, what's that? We also had blue eyes too, but let's just continue. This name, Apayim, which is used in your Bible to describe God in a certain way, and people always say that, God and God's angry and so on like that. That's what it really is. It's face or it's anger. But that's not exactly what it necessarily means. You look up Strong's Concordance, and this actually means something different. This right here actually means nostrils on your face. And when somebody is angry, sometimes they flare their nostrils and so on. And it's used in that connotation. And so, like you look in the dictionary and you say, well, sometimes it's even used for this. No, well, apparently it was used a whole lot for the nostrils and not a lot for the face and anger, except for the fact that he was flaring his nostrils and so on. Yeah, and there's an idea of the snout concept as opposed to a face type situation too that's weirdly thrown in here. Sure, we're in God's image. Well, there's actually 2 gods in that first story that we're talking about too, and things can make connections, but it's all over wishy-washy all over the place. That God didn't even announce himself as being Yahweh before the burning bush situation. He was El Shaddai. Well, that's hooked up to El. Wait till the end of this presentation. We'll get all into that little idea and show you a connective that goes off that. And the bronze serpents that they had, something in the Bronze Age and back when, and so on, the Chalcolithic era. But yeah, sure. So that actually means nostrils. And so God, apparently, which we think looks like this, apparently had a large snout on him with big nostrils that breathes fire and smoke and stuff, and it's just written out of your Bible. But if you look at the original name and proper noun and so on, what this actually apam hooks up with, it's going to tell you that it has to do with anger. But if you look in Strong's Concordance, it actually comes out to being nostrils. So there's transliterations that go on here, and there's a lot of them, and these appellations that's used. But the strange thing is the first one, or most often, which is why this is placed here, that it's actually nostrils and nose, face, and then the last possible one would be anger. It's also an Assyrian connection here, and we'll talk about an Assyrian connection to dragons also. But there are all these connotations, and when it's used through Numbers, Ezekiel, all these different places, place for a ring or an ornament for beasts, swine later is used for it and everything. But what's it? Well, pigs have a nose like this too. So we're talking about nostrils. God's nostrils. Well, they say it's God's anger. It would rewrite the Bible totally if you turned around and said, well, no, it's not talking about his anger all the time, although he shows his anger somewhat in it. It's actually showing the fact that that this thing that they're trying to worship at the time, apparently it's a dragon. And just get a good look at it. When you peer through the pages here, what does this type thing mean? So, there's God breathes into your nostrils the breath of life, and on that version, there it is right there. There it is. God, Genesis, the whole little thing. Think a picture in your mind and stuff and doing it, da-da-da. Or was there a dragon breathing as a sacred dragon breath that's special or something, and that's what, da-da-da, the ether connection to ether itself that we ended up making as a form that knocks people out and puts them in a la-la state. Hey, there's weird connections going on here, but stop. I'm going to look at those crumbs. Oh, yeah. All right, come here. Let's go back over here and go down this hallway. We're following this trail right here. I'm just showing you these side trails. Man, I could go off in left field. Let's just keep going. So, this is nostrils. And it means so. And it's the breath of life. And, of course, nostrils is real. Needed, famous, things. It's got the whole connections to it. There's no denying that the breath of life is important, and all of those things that we could even say about it. And of course, if you don't believe so, get the air knocked out of you sometime, and you realize, oh, that's real important. You choke you out and die. So whenever you quit respirating, you died. So they realize that it's the breath of life, and people tell you take your last breath, all these weird things happen during it, and all these. So definitely a connection there too. But whenever it's talked about God, other than the times where he breathes in your nostrils and this, that, and the other, it's all of a sudden different. It's all of a sudden just anger, as opposed to he wasn't flaring his nostrils and going to do something. And every time a dragon gets miffed, he flares his nostrils, whether the little smoke starts coming out or he gets ticked off and starts lighting up cities, like we looked at just a minute ago. Let's continue. So he has a snout. And you could go, man, I don't know what kind of snout he has. It could be something like that. It looks a lot like a crocodile. Could be. I mean, it could be a cow, could be a dragon and everything. Well, what's funny about that is during the history of dragons and mythology of dragons, it has been all of those things. You follow me? Those have been referred to it. Like when I told my kids, there's no more weird little creatures like they show in movies and stuff anymore. We pretty much found them all. There are tigers, and you got to watch out for them. If they're across the other side of the world. They're here. Crocodiles only living here. This, that, and the other and stuff. And you find out about it. It's real scary. One could be living up under the water, look like a log, come at you, try to grab you, and drown you, and all that stuff. So is he a water dragon? Well, he was. At one time he was Leviathan, but he got blown out of proportion too because of being attached to betwixt of the myth that we had that took him to a different state that made him this mythological, incredible creature. I'm pretty sure people realize crocodiles don't talk, except for in cartoons and in fairy tales. Let's continue. So out of this list, there's a lot of times where you would say that snout must be an alligator or something along that line. And you can look in Deuteronomy. Chapter 32, verse 22 states the following: that for a fire is kindled in my nostrils. What? Well, God, this is the words of God. It's written in red. He's speaking. Fire kindled in his nostrils. What's up with that? Yep. And shall burn to the lowest hell, and it shall consume the earth with her increase, and set ablaze the foundation of the mountains. Sounds pretty drastic to me, and it sounds like he's about to set things all on fire up under the earth, causing fires to come. And why does he do it? Well, he lives inside a mountain, so when you have something and he creates a fire and he starts billowing up for inside of a mountain, getting pissed off, there's a volcano. And we've also made connections with volcano gods before. But then we also have an occasion where it says that smoke went up from his nostrils. And I've seen that happen when my dad was real pissed off when I didn't hold the light right while we were working on the car that one time. But is it just a metaphor? And if it is, people, why is he giving metaphors that have been used by everybody else and we still understand today are for dragons? In fact, his coals came and flamed forth from him. Here, fire and brimstone come down, going to burn the city down. Yep. He asked for sacrifices too. It kind of goes in an order. We'll deal with that here coming up shortly, but here we're just talking about nostrils. I'm just trying to get through this list here so you can see and realize what's being talked about here. This is a description of the God of the Israelites, and strangely it's paralleled by this creature in the book of Job known as Leviathan. And of course, a lot of people have read into this and they say, well, this is a stealing or a rewriting of the idea of killing Yam, which is also known as the sea. The sea is just Yam. But also there was this god, this creature that was Yam, and it's astrotheological. And it's the same creature that's the Kraken that I recently showed you in a video. And here's God and here's a Kraken. Well, at one time to these people that were there in the Mediterranean, the sea god Neptune was sitting on that thing too. But also it's Aquarius. Well, also it's Enki. Well, also that's Yahweh. And I've shown that. I entice you to look at my series, Written in the Stars. If you thought you'd looked at it before, look at it again. Here we go again. There it is. So that's this Leviathan creature, this monstrous Leviathan creature that everybody agrees and is being accepted as a dragon. So it's really known and realized that we are talking about dragons in the Bible, or at least Leviathan was. He was this giant sea creature thing. Oh, well, he was just a whale. Look, whales don't have fire. They don't do the things that what it said there. And you take it out of context, you're that. But if you take it in context, talking about a dragon, whether we're talking about a water dragon situation, hey, Godzilla's a dragon, comes out of the water. Out of his mouth go burning torches. It's Job 41, 19, 21. Out of his nostrils goes smoke, as of a boiling pot and burning ashes. His breath kindles fire, and a flame goes forth out of his mouth. You know, if we stopped it at that steam situation, you can see it even in crocodiles, and they can do that reverberation where they make a little shaking around them, which is pretty weird and kind of awe-inspiring if you saw it. But no, they add on to that he breathes fire. Oh, and you know God can fly. He's like Superman, right? Well, Superman was just an incredible jump, wasn't it? So moving along, but still relevant to the discussion here, is that dragon of Yahweh's nostrils, since there's evidence of ancient discourse on whether Yahweh could actually intervene in the world. unless his long nostrils as a metaphor for physical presence could reach the side of intervention. In other words, Yahweh is described as using his elongated nostrils, and these nostrils that are talking about breathing fire and everything else, is being able to, like a beast, like a dog, or like smog, smell very well with his nose. But if he's far enough away, he may not be able to detect. This kind of ruins some omnipotence. Let's look at this. This directly challenges the idea of the omnipresence or omnipotence of God, or this one that we're talking about in the book. Implies that Yahweh be actually a physical being with limitations as opposed to what we're taught. It's found in Psalms chapter 10. The wicked says, from the height of his nostrils, he will not seek us, because he can't detect us. What the wicked is implying is that he's not physically near their location. Mankind can get away with sinful acts without punishment if this is in course. Well, later it turns around and shows not, that he turns around and finds out about it because of his semi-omnipresence or omniscience. But if you look into the God of the Bible where you find him, he quite often doesn't know where Adam and Eve went to, or he doesn't know this or doesn't know that. He has to change his mind in all these other type of situations. So this omniscient situation was thrown out long ago from many different situations. This is a slaving area where you can see somebody that has a extremely dark tan or something over here helping to sell off white women. But a lot of people don't realize that this went on with every culture pretty much. But let's just continue and not touch upon that. So we have this idea, oh, by the way, all these girls here, these are all Egyptians. Of course, the wicked assumption is immediately rejected by the writer in Psalms, like we were saying, that he says, no, well, you can't get by against God and everything. But then there's that idea that you go, okay, well, I just wrote that off, then forget it. No. The problem is that it's already mentioned. Just like whenever it tells the Israelites they've got to quit worshiping other gods and do this, that, and the other, and only worshiping Yahweh. The only reason they're telling them that is because they are apparently worshiping other gods. There's that one step some people never go through, the idea of whenever you start breaking down the reality of this situation. But it made the writer mention it. So before we proceed to another argument, here we go. You ever wondered why Yahweh needs this huge circus tent for a tabernacle? Does it make sense that he would need something like that? Back at this time, this wasn't the church that everybody went into, was it? They would come out in the courtyard area there and people would talk to them from out of the church, but they didn't go in there. So why is it so big? I know, some of these sound a little far-fetched. If you could throw out one or two, you're still left with the same idea I've got for you, but just going through a little concept here on the idea that his physical nature requires this big, massive portable tent. And so it's recorded in Exodus. Of course, there's a lot of weird things, but he lived in this tent for about 440 years, or was it 432? With a sacred geometry number. Anyhow, there's all kinds of numbers hooked up to this too that go along with sacred geometry and big numbers, and we'll talk about a few of them coming up. But there's always this thing about a fire and a pillar of fire, and a lot of people have made connections to a volcano. But are they worshiping the volcano god, or the dragon that's in there making the volcano react? And that's the god. We'll see a representation of the only thing that they really were told to God to worship as an idol through all this. Although in my studies you can show that this God flip-flops around. It's not the same guy. It's actually different ones. And you pull it all together. Well, which one is that God Yahweh? Well, yes and no. So let's go on for a little longer on this one, perhaps to another stopping point. because a lot of what I could go into here is beyond the scope of this video and what I want to talk about necessarily. And again, it would be going down that rabbit hole and us taking a left and spending 45 minutes down that tunnel. And I think just a good mention, and then we turn back and continue is best to go. So when we look at this, we've gone past nostrils now, and now we're going to look at the wings of Yahweh. So here's the next curious existence of Yahweh having wings. Now, of course, somebody's going to interject or think instantly probably, well, he's the king of the angels, and so all angels have wings, so he's probably got double, triple wings and stuff going on. No, it's not necessarily that. It said he's described as a creature with wings, just like a lot of angels are, and seraphim, cherubim, and all those things too. And people say, well, if you look at the way it's described, it's really a bunch of eyeballs and all this weird shit going on, and these guys have extra wings and covering up their legs and all that type stuff. Well, seraphim have to do with seraph, and it has to do with serpents. Oh, whoopsie. We'll get there. But is Yahweh flying around in the sky? Well, sure he is. He does a lot of times. In fact, I did a recent video. I don't even know if I put it out yet. I've got to look back. I may not even put it out. Where it was the drifting away of God. Because right there at first, he's just talking to Moses as a person talks to another person. So they make him into a existing being that looks like a person standing there. Then they talk about how he can't really look up on him, and he has to look at his ass as he goes between two rocks and all this type of stuff. Then he's all of a sudden trapped inside of a tent. Nobody can go to it. Then he's trapped up on a mountain. So nobody can go. Then he's up in the sky. Nobody, even if they went up on a mountain, would be able to go to him. Except for this one little holy of holies, right? Well, there's 6 striking depictions of winged Yahweh. There's actually more than that. But a lot of those are in Psalms, where it says, hide me in the shadow of your wings. Gods and humans seek refuge in the shadow of your wings. In the shadow of your wings I seek refuge. In Psalm 61, as I seek wretched shelter of your wings. And this is a poetic type of thing. And it's looked at as being, well, it's got to be something like a mother hen, right? It's got to be something where they're taking care and doing something in a motherly way. But the problem with that is most of the depictions that we would have in the world, much less in this area right here, don't usually show a motherly depiction of birds and stuff in that manner. A lot of times where we just show buzzards and things are flying in the air, or even ducks in Egypt and so on, they're just flying in the air. But there are some stories about gooses and swans and things like that these Proto-Indo-Europeans had, going back into the Wayback Machine and how she keeps care of her flock, which is a strange connection going on there. But what's stranger about it is that also connects in their tales to ideas of dragons. So if one were to say, well, why would they throw that in there? It's possible that it comes from that idea. So from Egypt all the way through the Fertile Crescent, but all the way up through and Caucasus Mountain area and go on there, and they're never really pictured as being a motherly type figure like this that you see in type here with the babies. But so researchers have said that's unlikely the idea of where they got it from. And then there's that star asterisk, and you look under the asterisk and it says, well, all these Proto-Indo-European people had this type of context, so if there was already that going on and it was well known, perhaps that goes on to it. Well, where's this dragon thing? Well, it appears to, over time, go all the way back to those guys, but of course, they spread out a long time ago, and Neptunes and all these other guys that went into Egypt and all these different areas and everything, well, that sounds like they had the story from way back when and ended up carrying it to them, and there might have been variations on a theme after that point, but it all had a common reference point, and they're all still dragons. Even if they didn't say that word, that was one word that's taken from Proto-Indo-Europeans too. It has to do with things that Dracula's connected to and so on too from later. But Arthur Pendragon, stories that go from there to the Wayback Machine. We're still real familiar with dragons today. It's a common iconography. Let's continue. So they say it just simply wasn't part of the aspect, but it was shown hundreds of years after the fact. But another problem is that this would be a uniquely feminine image of Yahweh being a mother bird. And people can say, well, he's just taking them under their wings and doing so and so. Well, he takes them on their wings. Another one that wasn't mentioned there was he takes them on their wings out of Egypt and so on like that. It has these wings. You say wings with feathers, what's that got to do with it? Well, again, we're finding out dinosaurs had a lot of feathers off there. If you have a dragon back in the day, well, if you take the idea of the iconography that they put together and made the creature out of, you'll see that that has a lot to do with feathers because of flying. They didn't do the bat wing thing till later because of another reason. But strangely, that Anzu bird seems to have a bat face, but he's got eagle-type wings. But a feminine image for Yahweh to have is not a good idea, is it? So, because, you know, that's practically unheard of, as he says here in the Hebrew Bible, that you could be putting something like there. And the actuality of the idea here, we have where God is actually mating with the earth. Right? The very first that God hovers over the face of the waters and this, that, and the other, and let there be light, and all this stuff starts to happen, right? So, I shouldn't have to go there or too deep to end up showing you the whole concept there, but in that idea is mating with the earth. Well, if you look in the ancient Greeks, they had the same story where, you know, there was this chaos and it all comes out of nowhere. Yeah, so did everybody that's connected to this. And then the people that are only slightly connected do have variations of stuff that sounds extremely familiar, don't they? But God mates with the earth and makes it all happen, and that's just like Gaia in the ancient story. And it gets reflected a few more times after that. But then that creator idea is not really Yahweh. No, I'm about to show you that here in a little while. It'll be in the next position here off of it that we go to, but it's kind of a strange thing. But of course, if you take and throw Asherah away, his wife, and the whole pantheon and the ability for them to be families that are making other gods and made it all happen, and just try to twist it all into one, you have to throw out the feminine concept. But in those concepts that you really like and, you know, go along with this idea and always had and been a real important puzzle piece, you still put it in there. You just throw his name on top of it. Makes sense. So wings were common, though, in Judaic early depictions. And of course, when we start to get to a point here, we're talking about Canaanites and stuff, and you get before that and it's proto-Canaanites, because that's who the people were that got taken into captivity and then came back. And when they came back, they were totally different people. Had this whole new idea and changed it again. That's not for the scope of this video, but here we see him actually standing on that cherubim or lamasu of the Sumerians and riding it in. This would have been after that point too, so you can see there's definitely an adoptive there. And while there are four-winged creatures there, look like butterflies more than a bird depiction with just two. That's common in the Sumerians in quite a few places. In fact, some of these snakes we'll show you in a little bit didn't just have two wings, but they had a set of four like a dragonfly. Well, why do you call it a dragonfly? Because that. See, some of these things just radically easy to connect, but all these ancient Eastern gods had this idea of having feathers all on them, and in fact, some of them even were able to breathe fire. This was on the bronze cheek piece or a horse, believed to be a depiction of Yahweh, circa about 800 BC. Strange thing there is there's not donkeys anymore. We got horses. Where did that come from? Well, the Hyksos brought them in and down through to Egypt. We made those other connections, but man, I'm going to go out in left field. Let's stay on this string. Let's stay on this path right here. Everybody get back here again. This way. Let's keep going. Now, we've only gotten to two concepts here so far of it, but again, as I said just earlier, that Anzu bird, well, he's got kind of a bat face on him, But you know he's got to do with the lion claws that are on him, but his body is covered with feathers, and he's got those wings on him too. And a lot of people would say, well, that's not a dragon, that's something else. But no, that's the dragon. Yeah. And it was a lesser deity, and somebody who caused confusion and chaos and a problem, and at one point steals all the MEs and stuff off of it. But let's continue. On the right, there's Ninurta attacking him, and he's a storm god, and he also has that lightning bolt depiction that everybody has. I don't know why, but instantly whenever I saw this picture, I was like, oh, this Castaway. And Tom, this is a symbol that was on the box of it there, and he's trying to do that. But in Psalms 91:4, we see a mention of God having wings. In fact, there's more than that. We talked about his wings being tucked, but he'll cover you with his wings, and under his wings you will find refuge and all these type of things. And under his pinions, well, pinions are the bigger flat feathers of birds. So it's this whole mother bird concept. I mean, it's pretty easy to see there. But does that bring about a depiction of a dragon? Dragons don't have wings, right? Well, no, actually they did. In fact, you can look at all these old depictions, even in the Americas here, where there are winged serpents on these pots, and they have feathers as opposed to the bat depiction that we were talking about before. That seems to be more of a modern one out of it, but it can be also seen to be even in the Anzu bird. And his depiction of being over the night and all these things, because people notice that bats only come out at night time. Let's continue here. So there's a lot of connections there, and it goes all the way to the medieval areas and all through that we have. But you think of this concept of they wanting livestock, they want virgins, and they want gold. Not necessarily in that order. Is that something that's new and medieval, or does that come from the Wayback Machine? And this story portion seems to come from the way back machine. It's been attached to it the whole time in this concept. Sure, we know it in the modern day as our woman that's a virgin, that's the daughter of a king, that's trapped in a tall tower, besieged by a dragon. Oh, you know how it goes, don't you, Shrek? Let's go to the next part in your top left-hand corner, and we'll continue from here, because now we're going on to another portion of the story and how God wants livestock, he wants virgins, he wants gold. How about a gold virgin that you treat like livestock? Oops, and